And we're very happy to have with us today two great speakers from the public companies. And they're going to talk to us about public company use of Xbrl. And I think a lot of people right now are asking themselves, gee, who is using my data? And we know that you've all been filing in Xbrl for a number of years now. We know that investors are using it, your shareholders are using it, regulators are using the data, both from the FASB as well as the SEC. But there's a wealth of data available for all of public companies to use as well. It could range from the investor relations department to financial planning to accounting. And so we have with us today Greg Zegarowski. Greg is Assistant Controller of Integrated Reporting at URS Corporation. Greg is a CPA. He's with URS, which is an $11 billion international provider of engineering, construction, and technical services. Before Greg joined URS, he was a principal with Financial Leadership Corporation, which is a consultancy providing financial compliance and risk management services. He was also controller, CFO of a startup international medical device company, and he was also with Deloitte. Kevin Walker is the senior staff accountant at Dollar General Corporation down in Tennessee, and he joined the financial reporting team there in 2010, and he's been involved in working with the company's Xbrl filings since they were first required to do so back in 2011. Before joining Dollar General, Kevin was a senior auditor in the assurance practice with Ernst & Young. So with that, I'm going to turn it over first to Kevin, who's going to talk to us about some of his experiences at Dollar General. Kevin?
Good afternoon. I'll talk through a couple things that we have done here at Dollar General with our Xbrl data. You can see on the slide three main ways that we use it, which is to benchmark disclosures, to benchmark practices, and then also for peer analysis. I'm actually not going to discuss peer analysis too much because Greg's really going to hit on that, and they've done some great things there. So I'm going to kind of save that for him, but I'm really going to talk more in depth about the first two. Just to begin, I'll say we get this question, fairly frequently. How do we begin using this Xbrl data? And I think that's a great question. I think it's important to consider because honestly, we didn't set out to just start. How can we use this data? Sitting around thinking about it. It was really more of a natural progression. Something we were doing anyway. This benchmarking disclosures and practices and peer analysis, something we've always been doing. And it just kind of naturally happened that we moved into this, and I'll kind of walk through how, but there became a more effective, efficient way, which I think is something we're all striving to do, is find more effective and efficient ways to do what we do already, and that's kind of how we came to do this. So with that said, I'm going to walk you through just real quickly what we do on disclosures and practices and some of that benchmarking. So you can see here, I've just kind of laid out on our disclosure slide here exactly, kind of how we came to start benchmarking our disclosures using Xbrl data. So in this case, we'd have a particular event which would occur, something unique to us, or not unique to us, but something unique that doesn't frequently happen. And for example, for those of you who know much about Dollar General, we've been in the news recently. We made an offer to purchase Family Dollar back in August. And that is continuing to go back and forth a little bit, but in this particular case, it happened. Our initial offer occurred about 10 days before our filing, so it was after our quarter, but it was a subsequent event. And obviously, we're not frequently in the acquisition mode, so this was something new to us in terms of what exactly we needed to be disclosing and what that would look like. So in this case, that was the event that occurred. We made this offer. And we need to determine here within just a few days time span exactly what our disclosure would look like. So I've progressed down to using the taxonomy, which just using the Yeti to go out and see what would be some possible tags that people might use in this situation. And then from there, and I'll walk through this in depth here in a second. But then we would go ahead and select our Xbrl tool of choice, which for us and in both of my examples is going to be Consistency Suite. I'll give the disclaimer, they didn't, this wasn't part of the deal, how you speak, but you talk about Consistency Suite or anything like that. That's just what we use. And I know there are a lot of great tools out there, And quite frankly, some of the examples I walk through here today, there might be better or more effective or efficient ways to even do the research that I'm doing. But it's just my goal today to kind of show you how we've set out to use this data. So in our case, we are using Consistency Suite, and it's been great for what we need it for. And so then I'll show you how we search for the filings using those previously identified tags, and then how we drill down on the filings that we found to be useful and how we use that then. So on this next slide, and I'm not sure, hopefully you guys can see this. If not, this is a screen from Consistency Suite. So this is what would actually pop up on my screen. And basically what you're looking at is I would set up a filter down here in the left-hand corner is basically the filter that I set up. And again, I mentioned earlier, that I would start by identifying the event and then going out and finding a tag that would be possibly used here. So in this case, the tag that I selected was this business acquisition share price. So in our case, we offered we had our offer price per share that we were going to set out to do. So we knew that would be part of our disclosure, or felt like it would be. So that's the tag I chose to research. And I actually also further clarified our search with this subsequent events member right here, just because I thought that would be effective or useful to us to see who else has this happened to where it was something after the quarter. So using that, then I also set some other parameters. You can see here I started with the retail industry, and then the years I was going to search on, things like that. And you can always, for my case, a lot of times, depending on what I'm trying to do, but in this case, I wanted to start fairly narrow. So start with just the retail industry, and then if my results came back and I didn't have enough or I couldn't find anything useful, I could go back and take that filter off or open it up to more industries. But in this case, that's kind of where I started. So from there, once I had that set up, I'll take you to the next slide here. So from here, you have different options you can use. And I also want to say, this is by no means meant to be a tutorial on how to use Consistency Suite. If you guys are subscribers to that, we had a meeting with Greg Saunders, kind of impromptu, back when we first started using it, to ask him a question about something. And we ended up on the phone with him for about an hour, and he kind of walked us through all these great things you can do with the tool. And so that really helped get us on the road to doing this. I would definitely encourage you, if you are a subscriber, to be in touch with somebody if you're not using it to its full capability right now, because it's a very powerful tool. And I'm only scratching the surface on what you can do. So with that said, so I clicked on this option up here, this concepts reported by filing, and it produced these results right here. You see I had 8 rows, and then this was perfect. This was about the amount of data I was kind of looking for. I didn't want to have to comb through hundreds and hundreds, but I just wanted to see some examples. And with this particular option, you can see all the information, but particularly you can see the entity name here, the date of the filing, where they use this tag. And then this option right here, this first option, is what I would then use to drill down on the filings. So what I did was just sit here and say, who of these entities, who that's used this would be interesting to me? Who do I think might have something that we could compare to and hold ours up against? And in this case, with only 8 of them, I'm able to look at all of them fairly quickly. But so you go, and if you click on this button right here, it basically takes you directly to the SEC filings for that company, that particular filing where they use the tag. And this is just a perfect way for us to more effectively look at other filings, others' filings, because it takes you directly there. So I'm not doing the, having to set up 50 different favorite websites for, investor relations for all these companies. It's just all right here, depending on what I'm looking for. And, again, being able to access the filing directly, I don't even have to go, leave this website to go type in anything else. I just click it and it pops up right there. So for us, for this case, to benchmark this particular disclosure, I just went to see who all had a subsequent event where they mentioned a business acquisition share price. And from there, could pretty quickly read the sub-event footnotes and determine what's useful and what's not from our standpoint. So that is primarily, so that's all on disclosures. That's really all we're doing. And we've done that with other items as well. The revenue recognition guidance came out pretty close to a filing date for us. So we wanted to do something kind of similar and just see what others were saying about it in that short amount of time, the sub-event. So we use this frequently. It's just a great tool as far as seeing what others are disclosing, what their footnotes are saying, and just a great way to go out and more quickly and more robustly review those disclosures. So with that, I'm going to move on to benchmarking practices. And this is something we might do a little more frequently, a little more commonplace, whereas like I said with the last one, it's kind of a, as I'm sure all of you who are involved with reporting know, you kind of cross your fingers and hope nothing big happens there a couple of days before you file, but you never know when something might happen, and you have to make a quick change. With benchmarking practices, this is, again, something that was a little more focused effort, something that we might tend to do a little more frequently and have a little more structure around. So in this case, and I'm going to take it a little different route, and I'll, again, walk through what this looks like in Consistency Suite. But I would start by using a previously identified group of peers, and you'll see how I've done that in a second. Because this would be our peer group. Just like every company has a peer group who they benchmark things against, we have ours, and that's what I would use for this in this case. In this case, so I determine where the practice that I want to benchmark is disclosed, and in this particular example, I'm going to look at the accounting policy footnote. And again, pick your tool of choice, and then you just analyze the findings for the data that you find to be useful. So I'll take you to the next slide here, and again, hopefully you all can see this, but basically this looks very similar to how we started just a minute ago. But you can see down here, my filter looks a little bit different. This is where you start all of your searches, and you can see this is basically the peer group that I have saved. And this, although it's showing up here under Advanced Filter, you can save filters like this. So I save a peer group, basically, so I don't have to go out and grab each company every time I want to do something. And as I mentioned earlier, you can always go back later and narrow that down or add to it if you want. But this is the peer group that we've chosen to use most of the time for things like this. Under Concept, you can see that I've actually got 3 or 4 different concepts here, because there are a couple different tags, there are a few different tags you can use for your accounting policy text block footnote. So I tried to go out and identify what each of those would be. Obviously, I'm using the one that we use, but by adding the other tags that others might use, it enables me to pull in more data, in case somebody else is using a different tag. And then again, you can see down through here where you can further narrow or broaden your search based on other parameters. In this case, I've narrowed the year down again just to the past couple years. But again, you have multiple options to, you can start broad and narrow it down if you get too many results, or you can start narrow, and then, if you don't get enough or don't get any hits, you can always go broad. So with that, very similar, but I chose a different option, and I choose a different option for this particular practice benchmarking, if you will. Rather than the concepts reported by filing, I use this values reported, and by clicking here, this is kind of the results screen that pops up. You can see I have about 29 rows that have popped up here, and you can just see right down through here, you can see all the entity names and who, and it's obviously the names from our peer group. And the reason I really like this screen, what's really helpful for me here is because I'm trying to pull specific blocks of text. In this case, I'm trying to pull the actual accounting policy footnotes. I can click on this HTML option right here, and you get something that looks exactly like this. And it basically pops up a web page, and depending on your results, it could, if you have 500 results, it's going to take longer, obviously, than with 29. That just takes, probably 15 or 20 seconds to populate. But what I love about this is, so now I've got every company, and it's got the very footnote that we're looking at. It brings their whole footnote right into this web page and just puts them in order. And this is a screen grab, so I can't scroll down on it. But if you would scroll down, you would see, right after Big Lots probably is Costco or CVS, and it puts them all in one place, every single policy footnote back to back. So rather than, the time savings here, as I'm sure you can imagine, is just astronomical, because rather than go look up, again, 29 different companies individually, manually looking them up on the website, going to their investor relations tab, finding the relevant filing, and then trying to either print off what I need or copy and paste it into a document. Just by clicking that HTML button, it drops just what I need. I'm not having to read through the entire 10Q or 10K. It's just dropped the accounting policy footnote back to back to back for me, so I can read straight down through it. whether I'm looking for useful lives or whether I'm looking for, a policy on LIFO or something like that, whatever it might be, I can just quickly scroll through it and find what I need. It's also great if you're trying to share the data with somebody else who doesn't use XBRL or not familiar with it. I could take this and have a quick printout, that might be 20 pages or so, but that somebody could easily scan through and find what they're looking for. And so again, I've just emphasized this didn't happen. Using XBRL data for us didn't happen just as us sitting around thinking, well, we're doing this, we might as well try to find some use for it. It really was a very natural progression of, hey, we started using Consistency Suite to help us with some tag selection, and then somewhere along the way, hey, we needed to look something up, and I think, actually this might be a lot quicker if we just use Consistency Suite and use the XBRL data to knock it out. So again, I think it's pretty easy to use. Again, the tool is very easy to use for anyone. I think any company that's doing any benchmarking of any type, whether it's practices, disclosures, peer analysis, which again Greg's getting ready to talk to you about, anything like that, anybody can use it. Again, if you subscribe to Consistency Suite, I can't emphasize enough, take advantage of that. Learn how to use them more effectively, and it's been a huge time savings for us, and also made our research, our analysis more robust. Whereas before, just the time constraint, we might have to limit it to a certain amount of companies. As I mentioned now, I can make it broad or narrow very easily and kind of find that sweet spot of the right amount of data that we want for our analysis. So I think with that, I'll I guess flip it over to Greg and let him talk to you a little bit about peer analysis, unless there are any questions we need to address.
Hey, Kevin, it's Michelle. I just want to jump in before we turn it over to Greg and ask a question or two.
Sure.
We appreciate you talking about Consistency Suite. What is it you think about XBRL that makes it possible to run an application like this? And there are lots of other applications out there that do what Consistency Suite does and a lot more, frankly. So what is it you think about XBRL that makes it easier to do this kind of analysis? And how did you do the same analysis previously?
So previously, kind of as I alluded to, it was a very manual process, and I have, just full disclosure, I have certain companies that we might look at more frequently. I have it saved in my favorites toolbar where it's, hey, I can go get to your investor relations and your most recent filing pretty quickly. And I know there are different investor relations tools and things like that will pull similar data, but it was a very manual process from our side in financial reporting. If we wanted to look something like this up, well, for example, with the when we made the offer to acquire Family Dollar, it was a situation. I mean, it's not like you can just pull up any old filing for anybody and they're going to have that kind of disclosure in there. So I would probably have had to do some sort of Google search to find, well, who's made an offer recently, and then try to get to their SEC filings. It would have been kind of a hunt and find it, basically, or trial and error, trying to find who might have that, and then from there manually to have to go pull up all those filings. And the beauty of the XBRL data is I could go out, because we have this set taxonomy, these set tags, and know that, and kind of look around at them. And that takes a few minutes to kind of explore, and it might be a little bit of trial and error there too, to say, what tag might give me the hits that I want. But the beauty of that is you've got this set taxonomy, and rather in that search, instead of Googling and then trying to back into what I want, very quickly cranks out and tells me, yes, that's a good hit, or, no, you didn't return anything on that. Nobody's used that tag with that member and that sort of thing. So, right. I think that data has just really sped up, because before it was just a very manual process and trial and error, basically.
Right, exactly, and knowing not only that the tags exist, or the concepts exist, but knowing what their definitions are, and knowing that it's consistent across companies makes it easier to pull out the data that you're interested in and kind of know what you're looking at immediately. So absolutely,
yeah, the comfort of knowing that you're kind of looking at apples, or should be looking at apples to apples, because you're using a similar tag, definitely brings a lot of comfort to that. And that's where I said earlier, when I used that subsequent event member, because I thought that would really put us in bucket with somebody else, give me a bucket of people that were or companies that were in the same place. So yeah, that was real imperative for me. And this this may be a question that would come up later, but I'll go ahead and hit it now. The flip side of this is, and I know we hear this all the time. I know I hear it all the time on the webinars I'm on, extensions obviously are kind of the downfall of this, because any extended tag basically removes you from being able to go, obviously you're not going to show up in a search that way. So I think as XBRL, as the quality of data gets better, the searches and the ability to do this benchmarking will get better, because we won't have so many extensions and so many different tags. Because to your point, the same tag is really what enables you to do the search, and really the kind of the beauty of it in the first place.
Great. Well, Kevin, thanks very much. I'm going to turn it over to Greg now. Greg, you want to? I'll move to your first slide here.
Left off just briefly on the question of extensions, because it's absolutely true that extensions do make it a bit more difficult in terms of comparability issues. But on the other hand, what I've found is that a lot of companies, once they create an extension, they tend to just keep that same extension unless the current year update of the taxonomy provides a standard tag. So if you have a set peer group, even if your peers do use extensions, once those have been identified, it's not like you have to recreate the wheel every year or every quarter, depending on when you do your analysis. What I want to do is dive in a little bit on the subject of peer group metrics. At URS, we're kind of going through a think tank exercise of how could we gather some peer data. We certainly do that as a regular practice, both in corporate strategy and our investor relations group. Being an Xbrl proponent, I was hopeful that we could look for some other ways to either provide better information, or at least information that could corroborate what the other sources are providing. So we met with corporate strategy to identify most meaningful metrics, and in some of the following slides you'll see what those metrics were. And like Kevin, we had to select a tool. We are also subscribers to Consistency Suite, and it was a natural tool that we could use, and fully concur with what Kevin was saying, that there are other tools that have already been developed. Others are coming online that can provide a lot of good analysis and tools for companies. The fourth bullet point here, determining periods, annual or quarterly. The slides that we'll be looking at are based on an annual look, partly just for convenience purposes, partly also that we felt let's start with the annual filings, because we could really log some key metrics that we would want to look at. And the last bullet point in terms of setting up peer group metrics, it's one thing to have kind of a one-off project and say, let's do this. It's another thing to keep doing this on a quarterly basis. So we had some internal discussions and thought about who's going to do what, who's going to keep this process going. And I think another important thing is just that communication between accounting, the external reporting group, strategy, investor relations. Since day one of XBRL, it's always should have been done, looping all these different departments in, but now that we can pull these metrics very efficiently, it's even more reason to keep up that communication. What I would like to start with, we're going to look at income statement, balance sheet, and cash flow items. And some of the key concepts that we were looking at were revenue, operating income, net income, and diluted EPS. Our total peer group numbered 15. I think as many of you would certainly understand and know that some of your peers do work that you don't necessarily do, and vice versa. So sometimes it's hard to get a pure one-to-one peer relationship. So it's kind of you take some of this with a grain of salt, and then you have to dig a little deeper. Nevertheless, out of 15 companies, I thought this was very revealing. And for revenue, we came up with, out of our peer group, 4 different concepts for revenue. So 10 used just the concept revenues, but we had contracts revenue and sales revenue services net, sales revenue net. The way we accomplished that is we knew exactly which companies we wanted to benchmark against, and we using or going directly to the SEC portal, we were able to look at their filings, drill down which concept they're using. So the way we built our model was very specific in terms of we knew that these were the concepts that we needed to look at. And there's a little bit of upfront work with that, but again, once it's settled, most companies, especially for key concepts like revenues, they're not going to change that concept. So you're pretty good to go on a quarterly basis. Operating income was pretty clean, except one company just simply does not report operating income. So there's a little discrepancy there. Not discrepancy, but just, in terms of comparability, they just don't report it. Net income, just a little bit of variation. I mean, most companies use net income loss, but a couple companies use a different concept, probably because they had preferred shareholders, and so this was the concept that we decided to lock into. Probably the purest concept out there was earnings per share diluted, which in many ways is a good thing because that seems to be the hot topic that gets reported almost instantly on Wall Street. In terms of balance sheet, and again, these are just some of the items that we looked at, but these were, we had just tremendous comparability here that everybody used the same cash concept. And fortunately, assets current and liabilities current was pretty clean, so it was easy to come up with a calculated working capital with a balance sheet. And then moving to the cash flow statement, this was interesting to me. Cash from operations. We like to know how much cash is being generated by not only us but our peers from operations. And here we have almost an even split between two concepts that are used. Because we knew where to look and we knew which companies were using which concept, it didn't affect our end result. However, if you're doing a global sort of search for cash from operations, and this is one of the discussion points in the Xbrl community, is comparability. If a company can even legitimately use 4 or 5 different concepts, how do you get that comparability? So there has to be some legwork up front. Capital expenditures, again, most companies use payments to acquire property, plant, and equipment, but there was some variation here, and you need to make sure that the concept that they're using is actually the concept that you want for those key concepts. So once we did that front legwork, somebody on the team, and all that information is easily downloadable into Excel, so we were able to turn that into some pivot tables. The first one would be per share, and the filter, Kevin went over filters in the tool. You can set it for how many years back you want. Do you want annual? Do you want quarterly? And here we have our 15-member peer group that we were monitoring. And it does raise questions, why is there perhaps a big swing in one company and not another? What was that critical event? What I found too is that once you get it to this point, this is useful for executive or higher management to look at these type of dashboard type looks of earnings per share. Now, absolutely, all this information, I mean, companies can get this through a variety of sources, ourselves included. Thomson Reuters, Bloomberg, different pathways on that. But one of the key things here is that within hours of a filing, you can get this data. And talking with our strategy manager, there are some data points that are, if you rely on a regular source, that are not always available same day. The beauty of Xbrl is that once filed, it's almost immediately available. Michelle, I know we can even have discussions at some point about the iPhone pilot that Xbrl US was involved in, and just downloading this right to smartphones of Xbrl data. Another example of this is the calculated working capital. Again, same peer group, color coordinated. Obviously, pick the colors of the year but again, it's useful what's going on with working capital. Now, if you look at these metrics, they are fairly high level. One thing a company may want to do is drill down even further into segment, let's say geographic type of information in revenue by geo, and then that would take a little bit more work because most of that is built around is dimensionalized information, so it may take a little bit more setup on that, but it's also a useful exercise. Obviously, the strategy folks would love to see kind of the revenue breakdown, and it'll be interesting once this revenue standard takes kind of full hold, just what other kinds of disclosures might be interesting to compare using XBRL. This is also from the cash flow statement, net cash from operating activities. Again, same group. And again, just interesting why some companies seem to go up and down more dramatically than others, what's going on. It's a cause for other issues. One of the things that I wanted to touch on, and that's peer analysis. And before I go on to this slide, let me just back up. What we're looking at here is just really the face financial information that's very easy to pull. Kevin mentioned about disclosures. That's also something that we have done where we just have a particular disclosure issue that we're facing and wondering what did everybody else do in our industry. And it was one can identify either the footnote, let's say the policy note, or the specific tags that might be involved. You can easily build that comparison. And I know all our external auditors are also glad to provide that information. This is something where we can go out and get that information ourselves and get it in a very timely basis. Now, this whole presentation is built around how public companies can use XBRL data. Certainly, it's not limited to public companies. Private companies have access, can get all this data. If you're a hedge fund or investment company, all this data is accessible. And on just the use of SEC reported XBRL data, I wanted to spend a few minutes talking about the uses of XBRL data. And maybe I'll just stop here. If there's any questions that came in, Michelle, anything?
Sure. There actually there is a question that came in, and the question is, can you, are you able to do this from the MD&A section of a 10K or 10Q, or is it just possible through the financial statements?
Yeah, it's only the financial statements because MD&A is not. Now there has been discussion over the years that sometimes the most useful information is tucked away in the MD&A section, but as of right now, that's not tagged.
Okay. Okay, great. Greg, I do have some questions, but why don't you go ahead and finish up with yours, and then I have questions for both of you actually. And I also just want to remind the audience that you can send questions in by clicking on the moderated chat window or inputting your question to the moderated chat window at the bottom of your screen. So please do so if you have something specific you'd like to ask. So go ahead, Greg.
Okay. In the U.S., of course, we're focused on the SEC taxonomy. XBRL is actually an international standard, and XBRL United States is the organization, the umbrella over XBRL in the United States. But the standard XBRL is an international standard, and for example, there's an IFRS taxonomy, and there have been people that have been able to leverage because if you tag, let's say, a company's financial statement, let's say at the chart of accounts level, U.S. GAAP, IFRS, it facilitates toggling between U.S. GAAP and IFRS. What's the impact? You may have statutory requirement overseas to use IFRS. I know in the UK, the tax filings are leveraging XBRL for their filing. So there's definitely an international component to XBRL. Some of the other examples there is something called the Xbrl Global Ledger Taxonomy, which represents concepts in ERP systems. So all the transactional type of information, sales, purchases, payroll, anything that you may find in the in that vehicle or in that in an ERP can be represented by the Xbrl Global Ledger Taxonomy. Also, there's many companies are starting to report sustainability information, and the GRI is probably the foremost, let's say, the most used standard for reporting sustainability. And GRI, with the help of Deloitte, has recently come out with a taxonomy, Xbrl taxonomy. And I had an interesting discussion with one of the chief accounting folks at one of the auto companies recently, and they spend an inordinate amount of time, I mean a lot of people hours, to compile their information on environmental impact and so on. And by leveraging a single standard XBRL, they haven't done it yet, but the possibility is out there to synchronize all these disclosures, all these data points using a single standard. And finally, I'd like to mention, and I know XBRL US has been involved in this, and of course the AICPA earlier this year published the Audit Data Standards, which is a guide for internal audit and also external auditors, setting standards for how should audit or auditable data be transmitted and in which format. And the reason for that is well, to gain efficiencies in terms of sharing information and also drill down capabilities. And I know one of the issues that some auditors face is they spend 2/3 of their time trying to get the data and then 1/3 of their time analyzing the data. And again, the AICPA, including one other standard, a big part of the audit data standards talks about XBRL Global Ledger taxonomy as a way to tag internal data, make it more accessible for internal auditors and external auditors. So I think the main point here, Michelle, is just that, and everybody on the phone, is that XBRL is an international standard. There are many initiatives around the world. We deal with the pain point of filing to the SEC on a regular basis, but fortunately now there's some payback or benefits from having that data at the SEC level. But even beyond that, there's a lot of opportunities. There are a lot of opportunities for leveraging XBRL in different ways. I think, Michelle, I think that concludes my comments.
Greg, thanks so much, and thanks really to both of you, both Kevin and Greg. I have some discussion questions that I want to walk through, and again, if anyone has questions, please feel free to submit them through the chat window on the bottom of your screen. We've talked a lot about some specific tools. Are there other market that you guys can mention that you think people should investigate? Other tools that are XBRL enabled and basically provide the same kind of analytical capabilities. And this is really for both of you.
I would jump in. This is Kevin. I haven't used this nearly as much as when it first came out, but CalcBench, I hear a lot of great things out from people who have used it. The little bit I used it when it first came out and just kind of exploring it, I thought it was a great tool. I know Pranav and I can't remember the other name, but I know they've been on several of these calls, the webinars, and always do a great job and are very in tune to users' needs and things like that. So I've heard, like I said, heard nothing but good things about that. So I would say that's probably a tool, especially if you wanted to dive into it. That.
Okay, great. Greg, any other suggestions that you have?
Definitely work.
Kevin, I would echo. Yeah, Michelle, I would echo what Kevin said. I know Apoorva Technologies here in Silicon Valley, provides a lot of these analytical tools. And I think the easiest way for a company maybe to find out alternatives is to go to the XBRL US website And Michelle, maybe you can steer them where that is in terms of where to look. But I know a lot of those tools are listed there, and certainly any of the companies would be glad to provide a demo, and then sometimes there's an online example that they can use. So I think that's a good go-to source.
Great, absolutely. Okay. Tell us a little bit about other departments within your organizations, and how corporate data is used in other departments, and are those departments using Xbrl, and if so, how, and if they're not, why do you think they're not using Xbrl data?
So this is Kevin again. I'll jump in.
Michelle, there has been some discussion within our company about tagging data at a more. Go ahead, Kevin.
Oh no, go ahead. Yeah.
I think we may have a time delay here. So, Greg, why don't you finish your thought, and then we'll go to Kevin. And I'll ask specific questions to each of you.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay. So, Greg.
There's been discussions about because we have 4 distinct divisions in URS, and as luck would have it, we have 4 distinct ERPs, and so the whole roll-up process. I mean, there are ways of doing that, and of course, you can evolve into a single system for the whole company. But the possibility of tagging data at a lower level has been discussed about how to build that efficiency. And secondly, I think a good example, and it's really quite current. I know it came up at the national conference in Seattle a few weeks ago, is the development of the CET taxonomy, which is the construction, energy, and transportation taxonomy. And it's going to be like a subset of the standard U.S. GAAP taxonomy. And the reason I'm mentioning it is it's really headed by the surety industry. How can we make data more efficient within the surety? If a construction company has to go get a bond, and then there's the banks involved, insurance companies, that by leveraging XBRL, that whole process can be improved. So this is has been discussed and put partially under the wing of the FASB, and so there's a lot of energy behind this development, and it's an example of how an industry group can identify what's useful to them as an industry group, leverage XBRL, and kind of all, the whole tide, raises all the ships. It's good for the whole industry and the specific players.
Great, thanks, Greg. So, Kevin, let me ask you the same question. Are there other departments within Dollar General that are using XBRL, and or that are using that conduct analysis on financial statement data, and are they using XBRL, and if not, what are they using, and why are they not using XBRL?
Yeah, so this is a great question, and honestly, we definitely have other groups here who are using data. I'm sure similar to all the companies on this call. Internal audit, investor relations, treasury, financial planning and analysis. Just off the top of my head, several others, I'm sure. And honestly, to my knowledge, I don't know that any of them are using XBRL data. They may use some, and as Greg alluded to earlier, some of our groups subscribe to some other data sources who may, in fact, be using XBRL to gather some data, and they just don't realize that's kind of the what's going on the front lines. But honestly, the biggest hurdle for us as far as why they're not, and it's probably true for all of us at some point, or if you're not now, probably the same thing, just being comfortable with the data, being comfortable with how to do that usage. For us, like I said, it just kind of happened naturally as we got more comfortable with XBRL tags and what that looked like and the tools that we could use. It was kind of a natural progression. So I think education, training, those are probably, I don't want to call them hurdles, but that's probably where we need to focus in terms of preparing others in our groups. And that's true. I know that came up. Greg mentioned the conference. That was another takeaway I had from the conference, is just the need to continue to make sure we've trained others at our company to be participating in XBRL, and to be using the data and also complying with the mandate. And I think as it becomes more widespread, I think they'll be able to use it. It's just right now, where it's still evolving from a just solely compliance exercise for us into using it more. I think that evolution is what's key, and key at any company, to taking it from just a compliance exercise to actually using the data and making it work for you as well.
Michelle, I'd like to just add one other thing this discussion triggered. I mentioned earlier about the UK, the taxing authorities require XBRL as part of their filing. They use a particular type of XBRL called inline, which is more of a, if you can picture looking at a printed balance sheet, but being able to hover over the line items with the mouse and then see the XBRL embedded in the HTML. And that's what's going on in the UK, and I know there's been some early discussions at the SEC about the benefit of that type of XBRL filing here in the United States, because right now it's obviously, you're sending in two documents, one an HTML or an EDGARized version, and then the XBRL file separately.
Great. That's true. And the next question, and Greg, I'll address this to you first, is, what are the primary benefits of XBRL versus other forms of financial data, and are there any negatives to XBRL data?
Yeah, I think one of the main reasons that are some of the advantages. First of all, it's a standardized, it's an agreed upon language, and it's an international standard. It's not going away. It's not fly by night. It wasn't made up by the SEC. It's an international language and has taxonomies around the world. So there's a great stability there, and of course, speed. Once it's tagged, you can access that data internally, externally, much more quickly. I think if there is a downside, for example, we have in U.S., you could consider it an open taxonomy because we have so many elements in our U.S. GAAP taxonomy that there's a degree of variability, so that it creates some challenges within the U.S. Some other countries are much more closed in terms of their reporting requirements, and so you have very little variability. But then the advantage is that you have greater comparability, more easily. I think the other thing that comes to mind, Michelle, is that it's a free and open standard. Where this is going to go is really dependent on the people on this call and the entire industry, because you can take this and run with it, where the imagination goes. It's been around more than 10 years, and there's a future where this can go.
Right. Kevin, let me ask you the same question. What would you say are the biggest benefits of XBRL data versus traditional forms of data, and what, if any, what would you say are the negatives?
I would definitely echo what Greg said on the positives. I think he hit on a key term there, the agreed upon language. It's just something that, it facilitates comparison in a way that we haven't had before, quite frankly. And just the ease of that, which then leads to the speed, which Greg mentioned. You can just do it much quicker, but also while you're doing it quicker, again, it's more robust. You can expand, you can narrow, you can really just do a more quality, more effective search on items and analysis because of this data, and you can do a better job in a quicker fashion. And I think that's all you could ask for. As far as a negative, one thing I've thought about a couple of times, I definitely think because of how quickly you can do it, and just how easy it is, whereas before, when it's such a manual process, to get to the data you're looking for, you had to read a lot and do a lot of searching, and so you just naturally kind of came by the context of everything. Whereas now you can so easily pull data out and get it just in a nice, neat package. But you always run the risk when you do something like that of missing the forest for the trees, so to speak. You miss the context in which it's disclosed, which is no fault, obviously, of the mandate or XBRL. That's just a call to us to make sure you don't get so swept up in pulling the data out and putting it in a nice box that you miss what's surrounding it. Whereas before you almost had to look through all that just to find what you were looking for. So I think that'd just be a cautionary tale, just to make sure you're still comprehending the context and the old saying, you can make stats say anything, or you can make data say just about anything you want sometimes. So you definitely want to make sure you don't ignore context when you're looking at disclosures and things like that.
Yeah, I think that also factors into when you're creating the XBRL data, understanding that each data point is a discrete item. It's almost like a database rather than you're not sending out a report. You're not creating just a report. You're creating unique data points, and each of them kind of tells its own story. So and might be seen without being seen in the context of all the other data points in your financial statement. So I think that's a really good point. We have a question that came in, and the question is, what do you see as the main potential uses of Xbrl data at your company beyond benchmarking and peer analysis? And Kevin, why don't you address that first, and then we'll ask Greg the same question.
Sure. Well, and honestly, kind of as I mentioned before, we have so many groups that use data for different things. I think the benefit could be there for for our FP&A group when they're going out and building their models and things like that. To do it quicker and again to have a more robust use for it. And to be honest, it's almost one of those things, you don't know what you don't know. Also, I'm not even sure what all data points. I know investor relations. I know they look at a lot of obviously a ton of filings, and so the ability for them to go out and to use that to help formulate ours and to make sure we're giving the investment community apples to apples and giving them a comparison. I mean, I think the ability to have that data can only help make our disclosures, make everything more quality. Same thing, internal audit. Obviously, a great deal of testing around data and looking at the whole gamut of data and processes and disclosure. The more information they can use and package together quickly, I think just the better analysis they can do. So I think it's across the board the benefits that could be had. I see it from a financial reporting standpoint, but I feel certain that other departments absolutely could really enhance could really benefit from enhancing that and making a more quick and effective and efficient process.
Great, thanks, Kevin. Greg, if you could just address the same question, what are the main potential uses of Xbrl data beyond benchmarking and peer analysis?
Michelle, I can think of a couple. One is, I mentioned about the audit data standard, which was issued by the AICPA. We'll see where that goes in terms of adoption by both external auditors and the internal audit groups. But that would be a definite efficiency gain in terms of getting that data within a company. We've also discussed some potential pilots. For example, when you have multiple ERP systems, you have things like memberships and licenses. And if you have 50,000 people, you're paying a lot of license fees, membership fees across the entire country or world. But sometimes to roll that up very quickly. Using something like XBRL Global Ledger, you're able to tag that data. It doesn't matter which ERP system it's in. And you can quickly compile that information. And so it's kind of those small pilot programs where I think there could be some bang for the buck of using XBRL. Let's get at the data that maybe we just couldn't get before, or we couldn't get it very easily. And something like memberships, licenses, overtime pay, if there's something that where you can save some money for the company, that helps sell XBRL in-house.
So I think those are all the questions, and I want to thank Kevin and Greg. Thanks so much for joining us today. I just have one last slide that I want to talk about briefly, and I just want to mention to everyone on the call that getting more practice, getting more best practices in Xbrl creation is really critical to creating good quality data, because that data, as you can see, is being used by many different stakeholders, from your peers who are using your data to regulators to investors and your shareholders. And AICPA and Xbrl US have partnered on a program for an Xbrl US GAAP certificate program. The program is available today. It includes over 40 different modules that walk you through understanding Xbrl, understanding the taxonomy, understanding how to work with individual financial statements as well as disclosures. And I would encourage you to take a look at that. And this is what you see on your screen here is just a screenshot of some of the different modules that are available in the program. And we'll send you a little bit of information about that tomorrow in the email that will come with information about the replay from this program. So I want to thank everybody for joining us today, and most importantly, thanking our speakers, Greg and Kevin. And we hope to see you on our next session, which will be coming up in just a few weeks.